Okay, let's look at factoring quadratics with the coefficient in front of that x squared term. With the first problem, I'm going to do the same thing that I would always do when I'm looking at a quadratic equal to 0, is look to see if there's anything in common. I notice that there's no x's in common because there's no x with this 4. However, each of these terms has a factor of 4. So I can take the 4 and factor that out in front. Now to figure out what goes on the inside, I'm thinking, what would I multiply 4 by for each of these terms so that I would get this equation up on the top. So 4 times, I can see x squared would get me 4x squared. 4 times 2x would get me 8x, and 4 times 1 would get me 4. And so now I've factored that out. If I'm thinking about this, 4 times something equals 0. That's only going to happen is if this stuff in the parentheses equals 0, because 4 can never be 0. So I can just now focus on x squared plus 2x plus 1 equaling 0. Okay. At this point, now I'm just going to factor this like I would otherwise. I'm going to split it into two binomials. I know that I have to have x and x to multiply to x squared. I have to think what numbers can multiply to 1. Well, 1 times 1 is pretty much my only choice. These need to be both positive so that they can add to positive 2x here in the middle. If that was a minus 2x, these could both be minus because a negative times a negative could also be positive 1. But it's not in this case. So I've got x plus 1 times x plus 1. These are two things multiplied equaling 0. When two things multiply to equal 0, one of them has to equal 0. So x plus 1 has to be 0, or x plus 1 has to equal 0 in order for these things to multiply to 0. Now they're both exactly the same, and so I'm not going to have two answers. I'm going to have one solution for this one. So if I subtract 1 from both sides, I'm going to have x equals negative 1. I would get the same thing over here. I do not need to write it down twice. It's just one answer. So x equals negative 1 is the solution. Now over here on the right, 3x squared minus 14x plus 8. I still ask myself that same question at first. Is there anything in common? That there's no x's in common because it's not 8x at the end, it's just an 8. And then I say, is there a number in common? 3, 14, and 8. There's nothing in common there. No common factors, so I can't factor that 3 out. I'm just going to have to factor this into two binomials as it is. So as I'm setting that up, I have to ask myself, what times what could get me 3x squared? Well, I know I need an x here and an x here, and the only choices to multiply to this 3 are 3x times x. So I write that down. The next choice I have to make is what to do with this n thing, and I have a couple choices for what multiplies to 8. Either 1 times 8 or 2 times 4. So I've got plus 1, plus 8. I have another possibility, plus 2, and plus 4, because 1 times 8 is 8, and also 2 times 4 is 8. Wait a minute though, the order kind of matters here, because this 3x, when I multiply this out, this 3x is going to get multiplied by the 1 on the end. So 3x times 4 is 12x, but this could have been in different order, where the 2 was over here, so the 3x got multiplied by the 2. Okay, whatever's in this spot is only going to be multiplied by x, so it won't be magnified as much as this will over here. So I have some other choices about how I can write this. I can also go 3x minus 1. Oops. Sorry, I'll get to that in a minute. 3x plus 8 times x plus 1. Or 3x plus 4 times x plus 2. And as I'm thinking about that, I know I have to multiply these out and try to see which one will get me this middle term. And let's look at just this top one. 3x times 8 is 24x. And 1 times x is 1x. And it will get me 25x in the middle. That's not negative 14x. And as I look down on all these, I think, man, this is all just positive. I'm never going to get negative 14x. And then it occurs to me, well, two numbers multiplying to 8, they could both be negative. Negative 4 and negative 2. So I realize that all the stuff that I just did, I can't have any of those positive numbers. I have to have negative numbers for all of them. So I need to change all those essentially to negative. Okay, now I need to just try them all out. This is kind of tedious, so sometimes it's nice to just kind of, if you can start to figure them out in your head and think about how they work, it might make it a little bit easier. But if all else fails, you can just multiply out all these possibilities and see which one actually does give you this quadratic equation. So this top one gave me 25, so with negatives it's going to give me negative 25. Let's check out this one. That's 3x times negative 4, which is negative 12x, and this is negative 2 times x, which is negative 2x, and you combine those and you get negative 14x. That is your middle term. So this is the one we want to look at right here. Got kind of lucky, got that early. You might have to try through all of them until you find it at the last one sometimes. So we have factored this to 3x minus 2 times x minus 4 equals 0. Then you do this the same way you do the other ones. We found this as two things multiplied equaling 0. The only way two things can multiply to equal 0 is if one or the other of them equals 0 itself. So I'll write that down. And if I do the algebra behind this, I'm going to add 2 to both sides. 3x equals 2. Divide by 3, and I get x equals 2/3. And for x minus 4, x would have to equal 4. So those are my solutions.